were saying to yourself, or you heard a common agreement or a theme in the things that people were saying, or if a question arose or an observation, this is a chance to hear what's going on in the table conversation. So any comments, questions, observations, short stories, anecdotes?
Rachel reminded me of something I used to do that I hadn't been doing, and that's instead of setting a certain time to pray, having a certain place where you pray, you know, like a quiet church, which every time I've been a member of the parish, I've had somewhere in that church where I've just felt the ability to connect with God. And I've been going to 3 different parishes for various reasons, taking different people to church. But I opened the door to a church near my grandma's house recently, and it was so quiet. And I was just like, oh, I have to come earlier next time so I can sit in here and pray. And Rachel said that that's one of the things she does that kind of reminded me of something I used to do that I need to.
That's great. Did y'all hear that? I mean, they're talking about habits, about those behavioral habits that help the life of reflection and that interior life, about having a place to pray, not just a regimented time that you try to stay faithful to, but a place, the place where you pray. Some people have a favorite chair in their house. You know, if mommy's in that room, it's prayer time. You know, so those really basic observations are hugely important in the life of prayer. I think sometimes we think it's just, you know, if I could just tune in to God, it would all be. Well, you know, there's ways to get there. There's wisdom there. That's great. Other observations, things you heard, things you wanted to. You had a list of ethical questions, right? Nice. Yeah. What am I not doing in stem cell research? That's all in my book.
How does it do? Is it just with this examination twice a day? Does it get boring eventually?
Well, since the matter for prayer is my life, yes. That's a great question. You know, well, the question was how is it to pray that examine twice a day? What happens to you? There are certainly periods of time where everybody experiences where prayer is dry, as the mystics like to talk about it. You know, just there's nothing happening, or it's like, okay, here I am, God, do something, you know, and nothing is happening. But what I found the effect of the examine is, which I think is so cool, which is what I think Ignatius knew so much more profoundly than I ever will. But what happens when the examine becomes a habit is that the gap between experience and reflection starts to close. You know, we use this phrase all the time, being a contemplative in action, right? With the suggestion is that one could, if only I could experience God in the moment. There's that great line near the end of the play, Our Town, Thornton Wilder's Our Town, right? Every American high school has done Our Town, or at least used to. Where she has died, and now she's come back with the stage manager, this omniscient character, and she's watching a day in her life from this omniscient perspective. And she says, does anybody realize how wonderful life is while they're living it? Why don't we notice what's going on? I find that when the examine becomes a habit, the gap between experience and reflection starts to close. Let me flesh that out with a little bit more texture. If you make a habit of once a day or twice a day asking God to show you your day and to show you the stuff of your life, you're not asking for, you know, lightning bolts or, oh, you're asking for what's going on in my day that has God in it. And if I begin to notice, and what we begin to notice a lot of the time is patterns. I find, like in spiritual direction, I'll often ask people about the patterns and about the circumstances when they notice the patterns better. I am better at noticing God's presence in my day when? Had enough sleep, I'm sober, you know, what's your list, you know, that you come up with, that you say, you know, this is where God's, I'm keener to my appreciation of God in my day. When you begin to notice those patterns, then I think what happens is this gap between I'm experiencing something and later on in reflection I'll look back and understand it, it starts to shrink a little bit. I think saints are people who get it in the moment. They understand it in the moment. You know, when they'd say to Mother Teresa, why do you pick people up off the streets of Calcutta? She'd say, because I see Jesus there. And people would be like, what? She's like, I see Jesus here. Was she delusional? No, she had this vision, which was, God is in the brokenness of these people. Well, I think that's what saints get. I think that's the invitation of the examen. And I'm not suggesting that the examen is the key to sainthood. It helps, I suppose, but I do think this gap starts to close. I don't know how to describe it sort of physiologically for you, right? Look, I'm walking. Michael will be proud. I'm almost minding. The idea, you know, Kierkegaard has that great line. Kierkegaard says that the problem with life is you have to live forward, but you only understand backwards. Right? Life keeps pulling you. What does the church say? It's too much noise. You can't do introspection. You don't have an interior life because it's too loud. Life keeps pulling you. What's the next? I mean, we know this. I've been checking email tonight. I mean, how ridiculous is that? You know, pulled into that stuff. And only in retrospection, Kierkegaard says, only looking backwards do we get it. I think what happens when the examen becomes a habit is that time-space gap starts to shrink a little bit. And with God's help, you get better at seeing here, in the moment, what's going on. The final practical dimension of that. For me, I'm Irish, right? I'm Irish Catholic. I have a temper. I don't show it very often. But I'm quick sometimes, like this. If I can just tame that first quick reaction, it changes everything, right? And it's like parents saying to little kids, you know, time out corner, count to 10, whatever it is. There's a reason they do that. That's a very simple practical thing that in my examen I've learned that when I react quickly, it's usually not good. If I take a moment, it's different. I'm a better self in pause and then response than I am in reaction. So I think what happens when it becomes habit, and many of you do the examen, so if others have other experiences, share them, but I think the great grace of the examen is awareness and a shrinking of the gap between experience and reflection, which is huge. And it's not magic, it's exercise, it's a habit, you know, it's like a good athlete getting in shape and becoming just utterly skilled at what it is they do. And they no longer have to think about it. It's, you know, they talk about muscle memory, well there's soul memory, I think. You know, and I think soul memory is you get habituated to doing things a certain way.
So in that case, well, I have a question.
Sure.
Every week I spend an hour with the Blessed Sacrament, okay, which I think is a good habit. But there are times when our parish has perpetual adoration, so I can walk in there at any time.
Sure.
I spend about an hour. There are times when I sit down and I look at the Blessed Sacrament and I have no agenda. Okay, I just look at it. And then I look away and I look at it again. And the next thing you know, 20 minutes goes by and I'm still not thinking of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good habit?
Sure.
I mean, is that prayer?
Sure. Yeah.
There's nothing. I'm not thinking about God. Well, I guess I'm not thinking about God. But eventually I get going, but it'll take me a little while. And it's the same way when I walk into a church and I look at the crucifix. And sure, there are times when I contemplate on the passion and the resurrection, but for the most part, I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll still, I sit down or I kneel, and it'll take me a while to contemplate about my life and Jesus and how Jesus fits into how God, But there's a dullness of 20 minutes of basically nothing. Is that okay? I mean, is that?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I think it's beautiful. I think it's extraordinary. I mean, people do all sorts of kinds of prayers. Like some folks will do centering prayer or things like that, where there really is this sense of an empty. They talk about two strands or two kinds of spirituality in the Western tradition. It would be true in the East as well. But especially in Christian spirituality, they talk about a spirituality which sort of engages all the stuff, and a spirituality that tries to empty from all the stuff, so that there's that quiet at the center. I think that's beautiful. I think it's a great gift that you're able to do that. I think it's a great grace that you get that quiet, that you get that. When I talk about the examen as sort of a very active prayer in the sense of things coming into the imagination, that's an intentional prayer. This is a strange thing I found very difficult with Ignatius early on, which is Ignatius is always telling us, tell God what you want in this prayer.